Okay, so I'm going to take this back and I will type one of these up as a cheat sheet for people who don't have it. The words about sound, these are words like alliteration, consonants, assonance. Those are really important words to know for the test. They want to know that you can not only look at the meaning of the poem, but that you can also look at the way that the poet is paying attention to how it would actually sound in your mouth, right? So the sound words are really important. Let's see, the rhyme words are less important. Oh, and the two words enjambment and caesura and end stopped, 3 words. Those are really important too, because those give you a good idea of how the poet is using overall structure. So once you know those ones, the rest of them are kind of like what you're reaching for the sophistication point on the test. If you know the sound words and what did I just say? The sound words and the structure words that I just said, that can be enough for you to really pay attention to the language of the poem, and you can then talk about metaphors and connotations and denotations and all the same stuff that you talk about with the other types of essays. If you don't know those terms, you're going to lose points in the evidence section of the rubric too. So it will be more than just the sophistication point. So if you're feeling like I have so many AP tests, I'm studying for calculus, basically study 6 poetry words so that you've got those down really well. One way you're going to get to that sophistication point though, and it really is very important, is to know the meter, how to find meter if the poem has a strict meter. Now I will say in the past 10 years of all the poetry prompts, there are like 3 of them that have strict meter. So chances are you're going to get something that doesn't, just because, I don't know, they like to choose poems that are full of imagery, and like a lot of those are more contemporary. But if you do get a poem that clearly has a very defined meter, it's important to identify that meter and talk about it. So you're kind of taking a gamble. If you're like, I'm so lost on meter, I'm never going to be able to understand that, then maybe now is not the time to try and figure it out. But if you just need a refresher, it would be a good idea to look at that. Almost always it's going to be iambic. Occasionally it will be trochaic. I haven't seen anapestor dactylic like poem on the AP test. Doesn't mean it won't occur, but they're much rarer, so I haven't seen one of those. I've seen one villanelle, which is one of those like really strict formats where it like repeats line 1 and 3 and so on, but the question told you it was a villanelle, and then it asked you how form contributes to the meaning. And so if you just looked at it, you would see the form, and you don't necessarily need to study that kind of stuff. I've seen 2 sonnets, so it's nice to know if it's a sonnet. Usually it's going to be William Shakespeare. I haven't seen a sonnet that's not William Shakespeare. So those are kind of like my general tips looking back from 1970 on the poet. That's when they started doing the AP literature test, 1970. So we have all the poems since then. All right. Yeah, I'm really.
Can you still get to sophistication if you like forget what the actual like vocab word is, but to like describe it, or should you like kind of guess at what it is and repeat that, or should you just not even mention that?
I would say if you describe it, like let's say you don't remember what consonants is, but you say it repeats sounds in the words. Let's say, because if you remember consonants, then you remember consonants, but like let assonance is more important. Okay, so let's say you don't remember the word assonance, but you say it repeats vowel sounds. I think that's more likely to get you the sophistication point than just pretending there is no word for that. Yeah. They don't do half sophistication points. Like I've been doing half points this whole time, right? And they only do these like solid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can get the sophistication point without getting some of the other points. Like I've never seen it where they didn't get the thesis point in the sophistication, but you can get a 3 out of 4 on evidence and then still get the sophistication if you have maybe, one instance where it's not totally connected, but you're still identifying most of the terms that you need to. Any other questions on it before I keep going? Yeah, others.
So especially like if you have we have to.
Yeah. And right before you got in here, I said the ones you want to prioritize studying are the ones about sound. So alliteration, consonants and assonants, and then the ones about structure. So enjambment, end stopped, and caesura. Those are the main ones that almost every poem has some instance of one of those. So that kind of gives you a chance to show your sophistication. Because you're all very sophisticated. I think it's the funniest name for that point. Like, this essay is sophisticated. But whatever. All right. You have your poems out, right? Okay, let's look at the Sirens poem, because that's my favorite one out of this bunch. All right, so compare and contrast prompts like this are quite popular. It's about half the prompts that I see from the last 10 years are compare and contrast ones, where they give you two poems and they say, compare and contrast either the themes or the literary strategies that they use in these. And you can kind of approach this in two ways. So the first one, the one about children, the barred owl and the history teacher, it says, it kind of gives you a hint at the theme. It says, adults provide explanations for children in the prompt. In that one, they share a common theme about how to kind of like ease the way for children, or how to make a scary world less scary for children, right? But they have very different tactics to get to that theme. So your compare and contrast part would be kind of comparing the theme, contrasting the literary strategies. And in this one, the Sirens one, both of them are different. The themes are very different in the Homer one, and the structure of it are very different. So when you compare and contrast, you've got to find the comparisons between the two, which is it's about the same story and it uses the same characters, but mostly it's going to be focusing on the contrast. When you do these style, it's really important to talk about the literary qualities of both. So even though in the Sirens one, to me, the poetic qualities of Siren song stand out a lot more than the poetic qualities of the Homer. Part of that is just because the Homer is from a translation. But you still want to talk about some of the poetic qualities in the Homer example so that you can set that up to be compared to the Siren song. All right, so let's talk about both of them. Okay, you know what? I think it would be helpful to read it again. I'm going to read the Homer out loud to you. So this comes from the Odyssey. Has anyone read the Odyssey? Did you in school? When did you guys read it in school? Freshman, yeah. 9th grade? Because when I got my 10th graders, sorry, this is a tangent, but when I got my 10th graders, everyone had said they'd do it in 9th grade. And so I did the Iliad in 10th grade, but then none of them had read the Odyssey. And that's fine because the Iliad technically comes first. But yeah, it was interesting. Like in California, sounds like you guys are both from California, right? Yeah. Sounds like that's more normal. And then where did you go to junior? Okay. So I don't think the public schools are doing it. Ew. All right. Our trim ship was speeding toward the Sirens Island, driven by the brisk wind. Now, with a sharp sword, I sliced an ample wheel of beeswax down into pieces, kneaded them in my 2 strong hands, and the wax soon grew soft, worked by my strength and Helio's burning rays, the sun at high noon. And I stopped the ears of my comrades one by one, and they bound me hand and foot in the tight ship, erect at the mast block, lashed by ropes to the mast, and rowed and churned the white cap stroke on stroke. We were just offshore as far as a man's shout can carry, scudding close, when the Sirens sensed at once a ship was racing past and burst into their high thrilling song. Come closer, famous Odysseus, Achaea's pride and glory. Moor your ship on our coast so you can hear our song. Never has any sailor passed our shores on his black craft until he has heard the honeyed voices pouring from our lips. And once he hears to his heart's content, sails on a wiser man. So they sent their ravishing voices out across the air, and the heart inside me throbbed to listen longer. I signaled the crew with frowns to set me free. They flung themselves at the oars and rowed on harder. Paramedes and Euryclochus springing up at once to bind me faster with rope on chafing rope. But once we'd left the Sirens fading in our wake, once we could hear their song no more, their urgent call, my steadfast crew was quick to remove the wax I'd used to seal their ears and loosed the bonds that lashed me. So Odysseus now is the only man alive who has ever heard the Siren song. So who's the hero in that one? Who's our protagonist? Odysseus as this hero, right? And tell me about some of his like qualities as a man. Well, one, he's a man. Okay. So hero's a man. What are some of his like personality characteristics or his qualities that make him a hero. Allie Rose?
Oh, well, the fact that he like did this.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That is the reason the hero.
So the fact that he wanted to put himself through, I'm going to say, psychological torture, or write down, I mean, creates this kind of heroic quality of him. But let's talk about that idea of sacrifice. What's he sacrificing for? His crew. Yeah, potentially he's like, I'll stop your ears with beeswax, right? So that you don't have to experience this siren song. But he couldn't he have put beeswax in his own ears? Yeah, so what is he actually sacrificing like for? You know, is he a selfless kind of guy is what I'm asking. Yeah.
Wasn't the siren song kind of like expose like the greatest desires and like weaknesses and stuff?
Mm.
He was trying to like figure out more about himself.
Okay, cool. So let's see. Come closer. A key is pride and joy. Moor your ship on our coast. You can hear our song never as sailor past our shores of his black craft until he's heard the honeyed voices pouring from our lips. Once he hears this, heart's content sails on a wiser man. So it's that idea of becoming like the wiser part, right? The becoming, gaining wisdom somehow from this siren song. And so maybe that's a kind of sacrifice for self-growth. Okay, what else do we know about Odysseus from this passage? As a hero. Yeah, Allie Rose. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, good. So Odysseus has, can't remember, I think some immortal blood. I can't remember the lineage of Odysseus. Does he? No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. Yeah. So he's fully immortal. Yep, I'm remembering. He's fully immortal. He's a king, but he's fully mortal. Sorry. So he is risking a lot by putting in this situation, right? And right there, yeah, that he's kind of like admitting that he wasn't strong enough to stand up to the siren song, and maybe he thought he would be, but he does ask them to tie him up, so he kind of like assumes he's not going to be like strong enough, right? And it says, I signaled the crew with frowns to set me free, and so they had to kind of like take over and like tie him even tighter. And it says, inside me my heart throbbed to listen. So it's a kind of like humility right there, like admitting his weaknesses a little bit. Okay, Amberly?
Shows that even though he's not like perfect and he's not like he can't withstand this, that like he makes up for his weaknesses in the loyalty, like the crew's strength is enough to comfort him.
Yeah.
You can tell they were really loyal to like disobey their like commanders.
Yeah, great point. Great point that they're looking out for him, that he has done enough in his life to get this crew to be like really sort of like care about him as a person. Okay, cool. Anything else that shows what kind of a hero he is? I think we want to point out his ingenuity here too. At the very beginning, it's his idea to slice an ample wheel of beeswax down into pieces, kneading them, putting them in the crew's ears. It's his idea to tie to the mast. Like all of that is coming from Odysseus's kind of like creative thinking. So he, and you might know this better if you had read the Odyssey, but he like prides himself on being the smart one. Like that's kind of what he bases his heroics on, is I am clever. He was the one who was the kind of advisor to Agamemnon and Achilles and like the muscle of the group in the Iliad. It's Odysseus that is the strategy guy. So at the beginning here, it focuses quite a lot on the strategy and the specifics of the strategy. Like he is talking about the wheel of beeswax. He talks about kneading it. He talks about like exactly the details of the plan, and he lays out that plan pretty carefully. Allie Rose, what were you gonna say?
When I was reading this, get past the
making sure that they're out of earshot of the sirens. I mean, I think he could have been extra careful about that, and they could have just been deaf for a couple days, you know. I think that the fact that he wants to hear the siren song speaks to that first part of that, about his curiosity and his sort of like commitment to knowledge and wanting to know himself, like self-knowledge, but also just like knowledge of the world. I think it's a bit of arrogance on his part. Like, I want to be the one to hear this siren song, because he could have let somebody else do it and tie them to the mast, you know, but this is for him. So I think he maybe potentially sets it up as a sacrifice, like, I'm going to do this for my crew a little bit, but I don't think necessarily that he would have had to. Yeah. Well, which part seems like it's a sacrifice? Because maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. I think that's fair. I think you could talk about how he was going to be the one to like make sure that they were safe. Yeah, I think so. Look at the line 2, worked by my strength. This is line 5, worked by my strength and Helios's burning rays. So Helios is a god, right? Yeah, so what does that tell us about him as a hero? I just guess he's a hero. Yeah, I'm really.
Well, just in this, it was written by Homer, right? Yeah. And so they like relied a ton on the gods, and like all of the greatest like stories were like man and gods working together. And so he's like, I don't just have ingenuity, I'm like also like kind of approved by the gods. Awesome. In order to like help.
Awesome. So it's like the gods are on his side, right? They accept him, and they like are sort of like, he's in God's favor, this particular god. At the same time, it might be an acknowledgement of like, I couldn't do this completely on my own. So it's a lot of like, you know, with the help of God, I was able to accomplish this thing. So a kind of humility there too. All right. And then last thing, when the sirens call to him, they appeal to like a certain part of him, right? So it's like to make himself, so we wanted to talk about like, okay, this makes him wiser. In what way might he be wiser after this? It says, come closer, famous Odysseus, Achaea's pride and glory. Moor your ship on our coast so you can hear our song. So he said like, oh, my heart throbbed. Like I wanted to go to them so bad based on this siren's call. So what does that tell us about him? Ellie Rose? No, you're good.
I think like
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. He's famous, and he's Achaea, that's like Greek, Greece. Achaea's pride and glory, like you are the best person from your country, you know? So yeah, I think it's appealing to his egotism. And then when it says, until he has heard the honeyed voices pouring from our lips, I think you're right that there's also like a sexual seduction going on with the sirens. Okay, so that's the Homer side. Let's look at the Siren song. This is by Margaret Atwood. She is the same poet who wrote that This Is a Photograph of Me poem that she read at the beginning, where it was like, there's a photograph and it keeps getting closer and closer, and you start realizing that there's someone dead underneath the surface of the lake. So she's kind of, she also wrote The Handmaid's Tale. If you've heard of The Handmaid's Tale, like she's got a dark kind of mind. I love her. So anyway, it says, this is the one song everyone would like to learn, the song that is irresistible. The song that forces men to leap overboard in squadrons, even though they see the beached skull. The song nobody knows because anyone who has heard it is dead, and the others can't remember. Shall I tell you the secret? And if I do, will you get me out of this bird suit? I don't enjoy it here, squatting on this island, looking picturesque and mythical with these two feathery maniacs. There's 3 sirens. I don't enjoy singing this trio, fatal and valuable. I will tell the secret to you, only to you. Come closer. This song is a cry for help. Help me. Only you can. You are unique at last. Alas, it is a boring song, but it works every time. All right. So who is the hero? I want to say hero. Who's the hero of this version? is it the reader or is it the siren? That's what I want to know. Is the siren here like a villain, or is the siren somebody like who is sympathetic in this poem? Or yeah, Kylie.
One, it gives off like very menacing vibes,
Mhm.
you know, and two, it's like, oh, I don't want to be here. I want you to help me. I think you're the best. Like you're the only one who can help me. You are like amazing.
Yeah.
And that, like, I feel like this is the siren.
Okay, cool. So it's like we're now sort of in the position of Odysseus or some sort of like sailor who's sailing past, and the siren is the villain who is trying to capture us, right? But isn't there some kind of joy in recognizing what the siren is doing here too? And maybe that is like us being the hero and kind of being taken in by her song, right? What is the siren? What is the siren plan here? Like, how is the siren song working? Yeah, Ali Rose.
She's with
Uh-huh.
the entire time. After she
It's a Ted Bundy move. She's like putting the cast on her arm and being like, "Can you help me with my canoe?" Yeah, okay. So she's sort of playing that damsel in distress role.
very, very classic.
Stanza.
And
Hmm. Yeah. Good. Angelina. Yeah. Right. So it's like, oh, let me tell you this song. I'm only going to tell it to you. I am always this villain. I'm always the one who's singing. Like, she acts like the song she's singing is usually like something different, right? But I really hate singing this song, and I hate being stuck here. And so it makes you feel like she's confiding in you,
yeah.
building a relationship with you, so that she can then like ensnare you. Yeah, I'm really.
Yeah, you don't really realize when the song begins. I think it begins after like the first stanza, because it's like it like stops with an end stop, and then it starts going, and you don't realize it started because she doesn't start addressing you until like the fourth stanza, and then you're like, oh, so now it started. But by then
Great
she's
point.
like built up this like thought inside of you that like this time it's different. It's not actually.
Yeah.
But like really gets you until the end, and you're like, oh wow, okay.
And you're kind of like, oh shoot, I've been listening to the song the whole time. Like I didn't realize. I thought she was just talking about like that she was getting ready to tell me the song, and then I could have plugged my ears. Yeah, Kylie.
And then like the whole thing is basically or at the end of the first stanza, eyes.
Colon?
Oh
Yeah. Yep, the eyes and the smiley face. That's what we call it. Smiley eyes.
The colon is there, and it's like this is the song,
Yeah, good. But when we read it out loud, this is the one song everyone would like to learn, the song that is irresistible, the song that forces men to it seems like she's continuing on. No, you're right. But it feels like she's continuing on to describe the song. But I think that colon does indicate like, hey, but the song is coming up, Yeah. But if you were just listening to it the way you would listen to a siren song, you wouldn't catch that and you'd already be ensnared. Yeah. That's how you remember? That's gross. You've had one?
No, my friend.
Oh. All right, let's get back on track. This last stanza, alas, it is a boring song, but it works every time. Why do you think she uses that word boring? Yeah.
Because it's just so easy to play on the reader. We're just like, oh no, she's vulnerable, she needs help. And then it's just like appealing to like our uniqueness, and it like works every single time. It's like there's not
So there's like this irony of her calling us unique. And yet us feeling like we are unique is what makes us like everyone else, so that we are not. Do you think that the reader in this case, the you she is talking to, is genderless, or do you think that this becomes a kind of gender critique here? Kelly?
So I think just knowing about sirens, like they usually just try to get like men to like die.
Yeah.
And so I feel like the fact that she's saying like she's playing the damsel in distress, she's kind of like and knowing Atwood, like the things that she does, it's kind of like she does a lot of like critiquing of men, and so she's saying, oh, this like deadly thing, playing the damsel in distress, kind of like pulling the men towards her. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yes, because I feel like, okay, if Ted Bundy was a girl, this is a fun experiment, and he was wearing a cast, and he's trying to get his canoe on his car, and it was a girl trying to get me to help her do that, I probably wouldn't. I'd be suspicious a little, but I'd probably just like look for it, not because I couldn't help, but because I'd look for a dude and be like, he'll help you. Like it's almost like we've so sort of ingrained gender roles that guys become the heroes and girls become the people who need heroes to come save them. And so as a girl, I don't know that this particular, as a heterosexual girl, I don't know that this particular song would work on me that well. I think there's different songs that would work on me, that the Sirens could talk about like how cool and unique I am in a different way, but the come save me thing, I think might be a direct kind of, sorry, Dylan, I keep like not looking at you over here. It might be a kind of direct like critique of like a masculine, let's not say male and female, but a masculine kind of critique. Yeah.
Also a stanza where she's like, shall I tell you the secret? If I do, will you get me out of this? Like you could look at that a few different ways.
Yes.
Like, to me, it seems very sensual, and so I think it's kind of like it feels like masculinity.
Yeah, and it's kind of talking about like the bird suit. Sirens were depicted here. It says depicted as birds with the heads of women, right? But she's saying underneath this bird suit, I am all woman, right? So there is a kind of like sexual quality to the poem. Yeah. Yes.
I was thinking about it. Well, no, I think because like if I saw this personally,
This seems manipulative.
It's like connecting to me, overly friendly.
Yeah. That's how I feel too.
I did that too.
Oh, Kylie. Let's look at the moment where I'm like, she's being manipulative the most. Actually, why don't you guys tell me, where do you think in this, so the bird suit moment, I think that's manipulative in a sexual way, but there's another way that I'm like, oh, I don't trust this girl. Okay, so why is that part a moment of distress for you? Looking picturesque and mythical.
Well, like in these sense, why would she do it?
Okay, so you start to distrust why she hasn't been able to get herself out of the situation. Dalen and then Tyler. Yeah. So it's all nobody, because anyone who has heard it is dead too. So it's like presents this idea that she is dangerous right there. Kylie?
I feel like with these two feathery maniacs, I don't think there's so much feel about it. I feel like one of the most like is, or like at least if you're like dating someone, it's like, not even just dating someone, just like if you're with someone and you're talking down about the people that you're romanticizing. That's bad.
Yeah, that's the moment where I too am like, oh, she's kind of like putting other women down and to sort of lift herself up and to say I'm a victim of other women. Yeah.
The fact that she uses like maniacs instead of like these two feathery sirens.
Ladies, or yeah, exactly. Maniacs has a very kind of like a kind of wrought history, you know. It's associated with hysteria, which is just a female disease. It's associated with that idea of like, oh yeah, I broke up with her, she's crazy, you know. It's associated with that idea, which is that like women are like not in control of their emotions. And what I love about this passage is she's using that idea to be so in control of her emotions and everybody else's emotions. So she's like using the idea of these gender stereotypes to entrap men. And at the end, she's like, oh, but it's so boring. It's so predictable. Like, men are so predictable. Like you can trap all of them, you know? That's kind of where we end up. Yeah, Ali was.
Like, what are the flies? I think when they murdered
Uh-huh.
they blamed it on that hysteria,
Mm-hmm.
well, and you don't keep
Oh, interesting.
doing that to this immorally.
Immoral, yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think that's right. So it's a kind of hypocrisy on her part, but I get the feeling that this siren is completely in control of what she is doing. None of this is like misplaced or sincere at all. All right, so let's pretend you did that in 5 minutes. you got all that detail about the plot and the themes and all of that stuff, right? Not possible, but maybe you got a couple things in each poem, and that's what really matters. One thing I'm very impressed with you guys is that you caught that she isn't actually a damsel in distress, that she's playing that. That's not something that everybody catches. So if you didn't catch that, that's something to look for, is like irony in these kinds of poems. Oh, no, I don't know. I haven't done that class yet. We'll see. But it's been in years past. Sometimes people don't catch that part. I've used this one as a test before, and so that's why I know that. So that's really good to catch the manipulation of it. Catching one or two poetic techniques that the writer is using is important in both of these things. So you've already kind of annotated this very carefully. So find one in each poem, one in the Odysseus side and one in the Siren side, a poetic technique. So something about the language itself that you want to share with the class. Circle it. Something you think is particularly clever or ties in with what we've been talking about really well. Yeah, like something in the language. So it can still be metaphors, it can still be imagery, that kind of stuff, but something that the language particularly is doing here, not just the plot or the character. Yes, structure would be great. Yeah. Just gonna say that. So one in each, and you just circle what you had, or if you want to find something new, you could, but you could just circle an annotation you already have. Does anyone need more time to decide? All right, cool. All right, so I want to visit with people who haven't really spoken that much yet. So Jaden, what is one thing that you noticed in the Homer passage that we should talk about? Awesome.
like in some of the lines where it's getting close to the siren sign.
Yeah, and it even goes on, racing past and burst. Yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought that was really cool. 'Cause it kind of just goes slow, like it's
I love that. Yeah, so the S sound then is almost like the break of the waves, right? The kind of hissing, but it also like is so snake-like in S sound. Do you guys remember the word to describe S sounds? Repeated S sounds? Sibilants. That's a really good word to have just because so many poets will use sibilants. It's consonants, but it's specifically sibilants to use the S sound over and over again. And I like that idea of like lulling, but I also like the connection it has to evil, an S sound, a kind of hissing, which we associate with danger and also deception because of Adam and Eve. Awesome one to notice. Let's look at another, Angelina, let's look at another Homer section.
I like the engine. You get like flashes or like this.
Yes.
Oh.
How does that idea of the flashes tie into his particular brand of heroism, do you think?
I think maybe it shows like how he tries to keep the safe.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't tell like the whole story.
Awesome. Yeah, I like that a lot. So technically not a caesura though.
Okay.
Caesura are the ones that it's a break in the middle of a line.
Oh.
Some kind of pause in the middle of the line. So what you're talking about is like these abrupt end stopped lines.
Okay.
You'd call them end stopped. And I think you'd clarify that they're abrupt with the dashes.
Okay.
I love that. Okay, cool. Let's do one more for Homer. Let's do Emberly. But not, I mean, you've talked, now everybody has talked plenty, right? Dalen and okay. Anyway, we'll get to everyone. Emberly, what is one in the Homer section that we should talk about?
Kind of a bit building off of Jaden's, the S, like the repeated S sound.
Sibilants.
Sibilants.
Mhm.
And it continues into the second paragraph / stanza.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's interesting because it still retains like the same like imagery and like he just sounds very vivid. So you wouldn't really think that he's like still under the influence, but it's like still a ton of S sounds. And then as soon as it gets to but once we've left, then it just stops. And it's really cool. It's so subtle.
Oh, awesome. I love that. And I also love that you're talking about how he's like almost wants to pretend he's not under that spell a little bit. And even in the memory of the sirens, though, he is under that kind of a spell. Yeah. Okay. Dalen, tell me something about Siren song that we should pay attention to.
Like how she mentions
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the bird suit image in particular. What feels like very bold about that idea? Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. I love that word suit right there, like that it is like a uniform that you have to wear, like it's imposed on you, but it's not what you would naturally wear. Like a suit is a sign of like formality, and when you get to know the real me, you're going to see that I am not this scary, monstrous thing. Awesome. I forgot to check in with you at the beginning. I didn't give you the poetry terms for this class. Did your old class talk about poetry at all?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. How about you, Angelina? Did your class talk about poetry before you got here? Okay, Okay, so I will make sure to type up these terms so that you have access to them. Okay, Sam, tell me something about Siren Song.
So one of the things that I noticed was, especially in the latter half of the poem, there are a lot more commas that kind of, end various lines and sort of interpose between phrases and the like.
Yep.
And when there's a lack of those and it's just kind of flowing in a way, it does seem more like, kind of like a lulling song, I suppose. It's just, continuous. There's sort of no stop to think and contemplate about anything in particular. And that lack of comma kind of seems to apply when, the siren's just expressing, kind of the nature of the situation, how men are going to, jump overboard into the sea and swim to this, even though they see the skulls on the beach and everything like that.
Mhm.
But then when she's being overtly manipulative, then there's the commas interposed, which gives it less of kind of like a song and more like if someone was vigilant and paying attention, then they would see that this is actually where the manipulation is occurring. Though
Yeah.
of course, because they've been lulled by the previous music, they don't actually view that.
Yeah, awesome. And that really feels very clear in like the third from the end and the second from the end stanzas. The I will tell you a secret to you, only to you, come closer, and you get all those like pauses.
Mhm.
I love that. All right, Kylie, tell me something about Siren Song we should pay attention to.
I noticed that at the end, like by her saying alas, it's for alas is kind of like the word you use, but like kind of like disappointed.
Yeah.
Like, oh, but alas, this happened, and so it kind of at the okay. Anyways, so before was really interesting.
Yes.
No, but like it kind of makes her seem, or it kind of makes like the whole thing seem like she's almost doing it against her will, almost like the sailors are like jumping in.
Yes.
It's like it kind of gives it a vibe of just like I don't want to do this, but like I have to.
Yeah, you think of like Odysseus and his heroics being about creativity and smarts, and think of how disappointing it would be to be the siren, where her kind of expression of creativity is lulling men to their deaths, and she has to do the same thing every single time because men are so predictable. Like it's like she doesn't get a chance to be creative the way that Odysseus gets to be creative. Allie Rose, what was something we should notice about Siren Song?
Okay, so there's lots of halfway through when she starts to
Mhm.
she starts with I.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than like saying
Mm-hmm.
one fire. And so it gives her like this individuality, I think.
Yeah.
And then there's the repetition of you.
Mm-hmm.
You to you and you.
Yeah, good. Like she's trying to create this one-on-one relationship, even though there are 3 women standing there on the rock.
She's very sociable.
Yeah.
Like she says the song is a cry for help. And the way the fact that she phrases it like that, the fact that she uses what's it called?
Idiom or a cliche.
Kind of, but like it's like instead of describing, this is my
A euphemism. Is that what you mean? Like instead of describing something dark and
using something like slang.
oh, slang. Okay, yeah. There's so many words for it.
Yeah. So she's using like
Euphemism is where there's something like a word that is like really harsh, like dead. My aunt died. You wouldn't want to say, I mean, especially with that kind of stank on it, but like my aunt died is kind of a blunt way of saying it. So you'd say, my aunt passed away.
I think it's all like
Mhm.
it's a cry for help. That's very intense.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fact that she's very sociable and understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. Cry for help, such an interesting phrase too, because a lot of times we use cry for help to describe insincerity and inauthenticity. That sounds really bad, but like sometimes we'll say, oh, it was just a cry for help. You know, the girl took too many pills, just a cry for help, like as a dismissive thing. Yeah, kind of like that idea a little bit too. Okay, so we've got all of these different thoughts on the themes. We have all these different thoughts on the literary strategies. So now I want you to try and write a thesis statement for this prompt. So I'm gonna get you thesis for this. Yeah.
Like, what writing, we like related to not related to like
I would do it, I would say briefly. You might, so I don't think there are any, unless I'm wrong, I don't see any references to Adam and Eve, or necessarily even allusions to Adam and Eve. But you could make the comparison when you were talking about the sibilants, or you could make the comparison in the intro or conclusion, where you're talking about like, hey, like mini stories about female deception or female, manipulation, or something like that.
would it be better?
For the body paragraphs, it would be better if it directly referenced Adam and Eve, yeah. Or just alluded to it, if it had talked about apples or snakes or something like that. Yeah.
How do you spell sibilant?
Sibilance. Let me double check. All right, so what you're doing is you're going to try and write a thesis statement for this prompt at the top of that paper. Yep, your thesis should contain that compare and contrast element, which means that your thesis for this one might be 2 sentences at least, It might be hard, but you're going to try and get into the thesis a theme or themes and something about the literary strategies as well, the poetic techniques. That's what I should call them. Okay, I'm going to do one up here. I haven't written one yet for this, so we'll do it. Okay, I'm gonna pause. Show you mine. While the passage from the Odyssey represents men as creative and heroic with its use of pacing and its focus on male bonding, the Siren song, oh, it's just Siren song. Siren song shows the irony of masculine heroics through its enjambments and tercets. The Odyssey affirms that men may be able to withstand sexual manipulation, and the Siren song shows how this hubris will be the predictable downfall of man. So what I've got in there is I've got literary strategies for both poems, a couple. I'm going to steal Sam's point about punctuation. I'm going to steal Kylie's point about alas, and Ali Rose's point about the I's and the U's and the repetition of the personal words and all of that in my body paragraphs. But in my thesis statement, I'm going to focus all of that around like the structure of Siren song and the pacing and like the way that male bonding works in the Odyssey. So all of the little details that we discussed will be in the body paragraphs, and I can fit that in because I'm going to organize it around my theme here. All right. Does that make sense for a thesis statement? Like how you might format that. It's hard, the compare and contrast ones, it's hard to get everything into a thesis statement. Sometimes it's easier when the themes are very similar. In this one, we've got like different themes, different strategies going. All right, so let's say that's your thesis statement for this essay. In a timed essay, you can kind of choose how you want to do this. You can very quickly bullet point your paragraphs. I would say no more than a few words though for your bullet points. So looking at this, I'm going to have paragraph 1 be about male creativity in the Odyssey. Paragraph 2, I'm going to have it be about how that stands up to sexual manipulation of the Sirens. Paragraph 3, I'm going to talk about how this is hubris, and we see that in Siren song very quickly. And then paragraph 4 is going to be about the conclusion of Siren song, which is all about like that will ultimately be their downfall, which is very predictable and boring. So that took me, a minute to kind of map out in that way, right? And as you're writing, you might decide that this doesn't quite work, but that is all the time you probably want to spend on mapping it out when you're in a timed situation. When you're not in a timed situation, you have a lot more time to plan out the perfect way that this essay would work, right? But when you're timed, it's like what they care about is that you are getting interesting observations about these poems. And if one paragraph is out of order or not in the perfect place, that's going to be okay. They're going to forgive you for that. It's a first draft and they know that. So the most important sentence is the thesis statement. Get a little outline going if that works for you, and then start writing right away. But for next class, I am going to make you spend some time on an outline. So I just want to be really clear. I am not having you like mimic what you would do on a timed essay. I just don't want to make you write like 10 poetry essays in the next few days. And instead, I would rather you see a lot of poetry prompts and then write thesis statements and little outlines for each of those poetry prompts, so that like no matter what you end up getting on that test, you're going to be prepared, whether it's old-fashioned or new, whether it's compare and contrast or single, like you'll be ready for it. So when you do these outlines, start the way that you have on your paper there with your thesis statement. That is your kind of like the bulk of your intro. For a literary analysis, you might want 1 or 2 sentences leading up into that thesis statement, maybe something about what it is about, or you can introduce the theme in some more broad way, and then you get right to the thesis. Your intro shouldn't be much longer than like 4 or 5 sentences tops. So for an outline, your thesis is enough for that intro. So I'm going to put a little paragraph 1 next to it. And then I have these as a very quick outline for if you were to do this on a test. But for this assignment, I want you to be a little bit more specific than this. So I say male creativity in the Odyssey. I'm going to want to put that into a topic sentence for this assignment. I'm going to say the Odyssey depicts men as creative problem solvers. Okay, that's going to be sort of roughly my topic sentence. And then I'm going to kind of fill in this outline again for this assignment. I'm going to fill in the outline with observations and like the points I'm going to make. So I want to first talk about Odysseus and his creative solution and how it is depicted with lots of details, maybe even unnecessary details to show the different steps in the plan and how creative that was. And then I'm also going to talk about the his sort of like crew members who uphold. Before I get there, so lots of details. The creative solution. So I'm going to give a couple of details that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the wheel, the ample wheel of beeswax. And I'm probably going to talk about how the mast block and the binding. Let's talk about all those details of the plan and how the passage really forefronts those details. Then I want to talk about the male bonding, something about how the crew members uphold this creativity and this plan. And in that, I'm going to go down to the part where they are rowing harder, they're binding the rope. So the very last stanza with binding the rope and rowing harder. Okay, so that's kind of for one paragraph. What I've done here is I've planned my topic sentence, I've written it out. I've planned 2 major points that I'm going to make in that paragraph that both serve my topic sentence. And I've given little textual details, little quotes that help to prove each of those points. So that's what I want you to do for your outlines. We don't have time to practice it with Siren, the Siren song. In fact, why don't you guys put your name on that paper? I will gather that and I will give you feedback on those thesis statements. I'm giving you 3 new prompts to do this next part with. Because again, I want you to see so many different potential poetry prompts that might end up on your desk. What's that called? Potential poetry prompts. It's also more specific.
Here's alliteration.
Okay, I'm taking the thesis statements. Oh, and I want to take your annotations too.
We just staple them all together with our reasons.
No. Put your name, Uncle. Okay, so I gave you 3 new prompts. You're going to write 3 thesis statements, 1 for each prompt, and 3 outlines, 1 for each prompt. Does that make sense? So you can do that on the computer, or you can do that handwritten, however you want to. But I want them to be about as detailed as that is. That's just the 1 paragraph. You keep going until the essay was done. Thank you. Gathering thesis statements and annotations. Are you feeling a little bit more prepared for the poetry essay now? Even after just 1 class, that's awesome. So in the after-school essay reviews that we're doing, we're switching over to poetry now. So you can come and practice. You should definitely come unless you're feeling very confident about poetry. So you should come and practice your poetry skills after school or on Friday.